A little girl cries to millionaire. She hurt me when you weren't home. He hides a recorder. Before we explore more, hit like if you think human connection is still sacred. Enjoy the story. The golden hour light streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the Ford mansion, casting long shadows across the pristine hardwood floors that reflected the warm amber glow like a mirror of memories. 7-year-old Ruby Ford sat cross-legged in her bedroom, her light curly hair catching the warm sunlight as she whispered secrets to her worn teddy bear, Mr. Buttons. This had become their sacred ritual, these quiet moments when the house felt safe again, when the walls didn't seem to echo with the absence of her mother's laughter. "Daddy says you're my best listener," Ruby murmured, pressing her small face against the bear's soft, well-loved fur. The teddy bear had been a gift from her mother on her 5th birthday, just 2 years before everything changed forever. "Better than grown-up sometimes because you never get that worried look in your eyes when I tell you things." The child's voice carried the weight of someone far older, someone who had learned too young that the world could be unpredictable and cruel. Her small fingers traced the worn patches on Mr. Button's brown fur, evidence of countless nights when he had been her comfort, her confidant, her shield against the darkness that sometimes crept into her dreams. Downstairs, Elliot Ford moved through his home office with the quiet efficiency of a man who had learned to balance empire building with single fatherhood. At 41, he carried the weight of both roles with determined grace, his dark hair showing premature streaks of silver that had appeared overnight after Sarah's death. The death of his wife in that senseless car accident a year ago had transformed him from a successful CEO into something more precious and infinitely more challenging. A father who understood that truly listening meant more than just hearing words. His office was a study in controlled chaos. Architectural blueprints spread across a massive oak desk, 3 computer monitors displaying real-time data from construction sites across the country, and a half-empty coffee mug that bore the faded inscription, "World's Best Dad," in Ruby's careful 7-year-old handwriting. But despite the demands of running a green architecture company that employed over 200 people, Elliot had learned to recognize the sound that mattered most in his world. The sound of Ruby's footsteps on the marble staircase always made him smile no matter how stressful his day had been. Each small footfall was like a heartbeat that reminded him of what truly mattered. She appeared in his doorway like a small angel, Mr. Buttons clutched tightly in her arms, her expression carrying that particular gravity that children possess when they have something important to share. "Daddy, can I tell you something?" The question hung in the air with the weight of a prayer. Elliot's laptop screen dimmed automatically as he turned his full attention to his daughter, closing the architectural plans he'd been reviewing for the new children's hospital downtown. This was sacred time. No phones, no business calls, no interruptions from the outside world. Just father and daughter in the space they had created together from the ashes of their shared grief. "Always, sweetheart. What's on your mind?" Ruby's voice dropped to a whisper, the way children do when they're sharing something that feels too big for their small worlds, something that might shatter if spoken too loudly. "When you went to the store yesterday, when Sylvia was watching me," her words caught in her throat like autumn leaves in a sudden wind, and Elliot felt his heart begin to race with a father's intuition that something was terribly wrong. Elliot's heart stilled in his chest, the same way it had when the police officer had appeared at his door that rainy October night with news that would forever divide his life into before and after. Sylvia Chen had been part of their lives for 3 months now, a kind, gentle woman who had been a child psychology counselor before transitioning into educational consulting. Someone he had thought he could trust with his most precious treasure, someone who had seemed to understand the delicate balance required to help a grieving child heal. "What happened, Ruby?" The little girl's eyes filled with tears that seemed too heavy for someone so young. Tears that reminded Elliot painfully of the way Sarah used to cry when she was trying to be brave. Ruby's small hands trembled as she adjusted her grip on Mr. Button, seeking comfort from the familiar weight of her beloved companion. She hurt me, Daddy. When you weren't home." The words hit Elliot like a physical blow, stealing the breath from his lungs and sending ice through his veins. These were the words every parent feared, the nightmare scenario that lurked in the darkest corners of parental anxiety. His first instinct was denial. Surely Ruby had misunderstood something. Surely there was an explanation that would make sense of this impossible accusation. But as he looked into his daughter's eyes, he saw only truth reflected there. Ruby had never lied to him, not even about small things like broken toys or spilled juice. She had inherited her mother's absolute honesty, that pure transparency that made deception impossible. The words hung in the air between them like a confession that would change everything, like the moment when a foundation crack is discovered and you realize the entire structure needs to be examined. Elliot felt his world tilt on its axis. The same disorienting sensation he had experienced the night Sarah never came home from her evening jog, when the phone call came that shattered his understanding of how safe his family really was. "Hurt you how, baby?" His voice was steady, but inside a cold rage was building like a storm gathering strength over dark water. Ruby's small hands trembled as she touched her left cheek, the gesture so unconscious and natural that it spoke of repeated trauma, of muscle memory formed through fear. "She slapped me hard because I spilled orange juice on the table. She said I was clumsy and stupid, just like..." Ruby's voice broke completely, dissolving into the kind of sobs that come from a place too deep for words. Elliot's jaw clenched as he fought to control the volcanic rage building in his chest. Sarah had never, ever spoken to Ruby that way. Neither had he. They had believed in gentle correction and teaching through patience and understanding. The very thought of someone striking his daughter sent a cold fury through his veins that threatened to overwhelm his rational mind, but he forced himself to remain calm and present. Ruby needed his strength now, not his anger. "Why didn't you tell me sooner, sweetheart?" He kept his voice soft, non-accusatory, creating a safe space for her truth to emerge. "She said you wouldn't believe me. She said, grown-ups don't listen to little girls who make up stories." Ruby buried her face against Mr. Button's, her words muffled but clear. "She said that if I told you, you would be angry at me for being a tattletale. But I'm not making it up, Daddy. I promise I'm not lying." The innocence in her voice, the desperate need to be believed, cut through Elliot's heart like a blade. He could hear the echo of adult manipulation in Ruby's words, the careful way someone had tried to silence a child by making her doubt her own experience and fear the consequences of speaking truth. Elliot pulled his daughter into his arms, feeling her small body shake with silent sobs that seemed too large for her tiny frame. She felt so fragile, so breakable, and yet she had found the courage to speak words that many adults would struggle to voice. In that moment, surrounded by the scent of her strawberry shampoo and the warmth of her trust, he made a silent vow that would drive every decision he made from this point forward. He would protect Ruby from anyone who tried to harm her. No matter who they were or how much he had grown to care about them. "I believe you, Ruby. I will always believe you." The words came from the deepest part of his soul, the place where his love for his daughter lived like an eternal flame. But believing and proving were two different things entirely, separated by a chasm of legal requirements and social skepticism. Elliot Ford, CEO of a multi-million-dollar company, understood better than most that in matters this serious, the word of a 7-year-old girl would not be enough, not because he doubted her, but because the world often did. He had seen too many news stories, heard too many tragic accounts of children whose cries for help had been dismissed as imagination or attention-seeking behavior. As he held Ruby close, feeling her tears soak through his shirt, Elliot's mind was already working, planning, strategizing. He would need evidence, he would need proof. And he would need to be very, very careful not to alert Sylvia to his suspicions while he gathered the ammunition necessary to protect his child. If you've ever felt that moment when someone you trusted showed their true colors, you know exactly how Elliot feels right now. Sometimes the people we think we know best are the ones hiding the darkest secrets behind carefully constructed masks. Confronting Sylvia felt like walking through a minefield blindfolded, every step a potential trigger for an explosion that could destroy whatever remained of Ruby's sense of security. Elliot waited until Ruby was safely upstairs, having her evening bath under the watchful eye of Mrs. Peterson, their housekeeper. before approaching the woman he had begun to trust with his heart and his home. Sylvia Chen stood in the kitchen, like a vision of domestic perfection, her dark hair pulled back in a neat bun that emphasized her delicate features, wearing the soft cashmere sweater in sage green that had made her look so approachable and trustworthy when they had first met. At the grief counseling group 6 months ago, she was preparing Ruby's bedtime snack with meticulous care, warm milk with honey and a sprinkle of cinnamon, exactly the way Ruby had mentioned liking it, exactly the way Sarah used to make it. The attention to detail should have been touching. Instead, it now felt calculated, manipulative in a way that made Elliot's skin crawl. How many other preferences had Sylvia catalogued and mirrored? How many other ways had she insinuated herself into their lives by becoming exactly what they needed her to be? "Sylvia, we need to talk." She turned with that gentle smile that had first captured his attention during group therapy, the expression of someone who understood pain and offered comfort without judgment. Her dark eyes were warm and concerned, her posture open and inviting. Everything about her radiated the professional compassion that had made him believe she could help Ruby heal from the trauma of losing her mother. "Of course, Elliot. Is everything all right? You look troubled." Her voice carried exactly the right note of concern. Not too much to seem invasive, not too little to appear uncaring. "Ruby told me something tonight that's concerning." Elliot chose his words carefully, watching her face for any telltale signs, any micro-expressions that might reveal the truth beneath her carefully constructed exterior. "She said you hit her yesterday when I was out." The transformation was subtle but immediate, visible only to someone who was looking for it with the intensity of a father's protective instincts fully activated. For just a fraction of a second, something flickered behind Sylvia's eyes, something cold and calculating and utterly without the warmth that had defined their relationship. It was like watching a computer glitch, a momentary reveal of the programming beneath the user interface. But the slip vanished so quickly that Elliot almost convinced himself he had imagined it. "Oh, Elliot." Sylvia's voice carried just the right note of gentle concern, mixed with professional understanding. She moved closer, placing a perfectly manicured hand on his arm in a gesture that was meant to be comforting but now felt like the touch of a spider. "You know how children are, especially ones who have experienced significant trauma. Ruby is still processing her mother's death, and sometimes children create elaborate fantasies to make sense of emotions they don't have the vocabulary to express." The words came so smoothly, so professionally packaged, that for a moment Elliot could almost believe them. This was clearly not the first time Sylvia had needed to explain away a child's accusations. The phrases rolled off her tongue with the practiced ease of someone who had used them before, who had refined them through repetition. She moved even closer, her perfume, something expensive and subtle, filling his senses as she looked up at him with eyes that seemed to radiate sincerity. "In my years as a child psychologist, I've seen this pattern so many times, Elliot. Children often project their fears and anxieties onto the adults in their lives, especially when they're testing boundaries or seeking attention. Ruby might be testing to see if you'll choose her over me, if she can drive a wedge between us." It sounded reasonable, logical, exactly what a trained counselor would say, supported by years of education and professional experience. But something in Elliot's gut twisted with unease. The same instinct that had served him well in business dealings when contracts looked perfect on paper but felt wrong in his bones. She seemed very certain about the details. She touched her cheek when she told me. "Children can be incredibly convincing when they believe their own fantasies, especially bright children like Ruby." Sylvia's smile never wavered, but there was something predatory in it now that Elliot was learning to see. She's processing abandonment issues from her mother's death, and she may be unconsciously trying to eliminate any potential replacement figures in her life. Sylvia paused, tilting her head in that practiced gesture of professional consideration that therapists perfected in graduate school. "Perhaps we should consider family therapy. I know some excellent colleagues who specialize in helping children work through these adjustment issues. Dr. Miranda Foster has had remarkable success with cases exactly like this." Elliot nodded slowly, but his mind was racing through every interaction he had witnessed between Sylvia and Ruby, looking for signs he might have missed. Ruby had been quieter lately, more withdrawn. She had started having nightmares again after months of peaceful sleep. She had been clinging to Mr. Buttons more desperately, as if the teddy bear was her only source of security in an increasingly unsafe world. "I just want to make sure Ruby feels safe and supported," he said carefully. "Of course you do. You're a wonderful father, Elliot. And Ruby is lucky to have someone who cares so deeply about her emotional well-being." Sylvia's hand squeezed his arm gently. "But we have to be careful not to validate delusional thinking. If we reinforce her fantasy by treating it as reality, we could actually be doing psychological damage." The manipulation was masterful, Elliot realized. Sylvia was not only dismissing Ruby's accusation but also making him feel guilty for believing his own daughter, making him doubt his instincts as a father. She was positioning herself as the expert, the professional who understood child psychology better than a grieving parent possibly could. But Ruby had never lied to him before. Not once. Even when she had accidentally broken Sarah's favorite ceramic angel while playing ball in the house, she had confessed immediately, tears streaming down her face as she brought him the pieces and begged for forgiveness. Ruby's honesty was as natural to her as breathing, as fundamental to her character as her curiosity or her kindness. The next morning brought Elma Rodriguez into Elliot's crisis like an answered prayer he didn't know he had been praying. At 76, Elma moved through the Ford Estates gardens with the grace of someone who had spent decades coaxing beauty from the earth, her weathered hands holding the wisdom of countless seasons and the patience of someone who understood that the most beautiful things took time to grow. She had been Sarah's dearest friend since college, their bond forged through late-night study sessions and maintained through marriages, moves, and the countless small dramas that mark a lifetime of friendship. When Sarah died, Elma had appeared at the funeral like a guardian angel wrapped in black silk, and when Elliot had tried to hire a professional landscaping service, she had insisted on maintaining the grounds herself as a way to honor her friend's memory and stay connected to the family that felt like her own. Elliot found her deadheading roses near the kitchen window, her weathered hands working with practiced efficiency among the thorns. She wore her gardening uniform, faded jeans, a wide-brimmed hat that had seen better days, and the old work shirt that had belonged to her late husband, Miguel. Despite her age, she moved with the fluid grace of someone who had never stopped, using her body as a tool, who understood that staying active was the secret to staying alive. "Elma, can I ask you something?" She looked up from the roses, her dark eyes sharp with intelligence despite the soft network of wrinkles that spoke of 76 years of laughter and tears. Her face was the map of a life well lived, marked by sun and joy and the kind of hard-won wisdom that only came from surviving everything the world could throw at you. "Of course, mijo, you look troubled." Her voice carried the slight accent of her childhood in El Salvador, softened by decades in America but never completely erased. She straightened slowly, brushing dirt from her gloved hands with the deliberate care of someone who had learned to treat every tool, every plant, every moment with respect. "Have you noticed anything unusual about how Sylvia interacts with Ruby?" Elma's hand stilled on the rose stems, and for a long moment she said nothing. Elliot could see her weighing her words carefully, the way people do when they have something important to say but want to choose the right moment and the right phrasing. Her eyes, still sharp as obsidian despite her age, searched his face for clues about what had prompted this question. "You know, I have been watching people for 76 years, mijo. When you get to be my age, you learn to trust what you see, not just what you hear." She straightened fully, brushing dirt from her gloved hands with movements that suggested she was preparing for a serious conversation. "That little girl flinches every time Sylvia walks into a room, every single time." The words hit Elliot like a physical blow, confirmation of fears he had been trying to push away. "Flinches? Like she is expecting to be hit." Elma's voice carried the weight of someone who had seen too much of the world's cruelty, who had learned to recognize the signs of violence in all its forms. "I was a drama teacher for 30 years before I retired to take care of Miguel. I know the difference between acting and genuine fear. Ruby is not acting, mijo. That child is terrified." Elliot felt his blood turn to ice in his veins. The confirmation of his worst fears was almost too much to bear, but he forced himself to listen, to absorb every detail that Elma's experienced eyes had observed. "Why didn't you say something sooner?" "Because I was hoping I was wrong. Because I wanted to believe that after everything that child has been through, the universe would not send her another source of pain." Elma's eyes blazed with protective fury, the same fire that had made her a formidable advocate for her students during her teaching career. "But I cannot keep quiet anymore. Not when I see that baby jumping at shadows in her own home." Elma pulled off her gardening gloves with sharp, angry movements, as if she was preparing for battle. "There is something else, mijo. Yesterday when you went to the store, I was weeding near the kitchen window. The window was open because it was such a beautiful day, and I heard Sylvia's voice change the moment your car left the driveway." "Change how?" "The sweetness just vanished, like someone had turned off a radio. One moment she was using that soft, gentle voice she always uses when you are around, and the next moment she sounded like a completely different person. Cold, angry, mean." Elma's hands clenched into fists. "I heard her say things to that baby that no child should ever hear." Elliot felt something click into place in his mind, a terrible, crystal-clear understanding that he had been blind to the truth hiding in plain sight. All the signs had been there, but he had been so desperate to believe that Ruby could have a mother figure again, so grateful to have adult companionship that understood his grief, that he had missed the predator wearing the mask of a helper. "What kind of things?" Elma's face darkened with anger. "She called Ruby clumsy and stupid. She said that little angel was ungrateful and spoiled. And when Ruby started to cry, because what 7-year-old would not cry when being spoken to like that, Sylvia told her to stop being a baby, or she would give her something to really cry about." The rage that filled Elliot was white-hot and dangerous, the kind of fury that could drive a man to do things he might regret later. But alongside the anger was something else, a cold, calculating determination that came from his years in business, from negotiating deals where millions of dollars and hundreds of jobs hung in the balance. "Is there anything else I should know?" "She, watches you, mijo. When you are not looking, she watches you with eyes like a hawk watching a mouse. And she studies Ruby like she is trying to figure out how to break her." Elma's voice dropped to a whisper. "That woman is not what she pretends to be. She is dangerous." That evening found Elliot sitting across from Ron Martinez in a dimly lit cafe downtown. Two old friends united by years of shared projects and the kind of mutual trust that only came from weathering storms together. The cafe was nearly empty. At this hour, just a few college students hunched over laptops and an elderly couple sharing dessert in comfortable silence. It was the perfect place for a conversation that could not be overheard. Ron, at 62, had the steady hands of a master craftsman and the paranoid streak of someone who had spent decades in the surveillance industry, first as a military communications specialist and later as a private contractor, who helped corporations protect their trade secrets. His weathered face bore the evidence of too many years spent squinting at electronic components under harsh fluorescent lights. But his mind remained sharp as a blade, capable of solving technical problems that stumped engineers half his age. "You want me to bug your own house?" Ron's weathered face creased with concern as he leaned back in his chair, his coffee growing cold as he processed what his friend was asking. "Elliot, this is serious territory we're talking about. Legal ramifications, privacy laws, the whole 9 yards. A 7-year-old girl is being abused in my home and I can't prove it." Elliot's voice was steel-wrapped in velvet, controlled fury that spoke of a man who had made a decision and would not be swayed from it. "I need evidence, Ron. Real evidence that will hold up if this goes to court." Ron studied his friend's face, with the intensity of someone who had learned to read people's true intentions, looking for any sign that Elliot might be overreacting or allowing his emotions to cloud his judgment. What he saw in Elliot's eyes was the cold determination of a father who would do anything to protect his child. "You're absolutely certain about this? Because once we cross this line, there's no going back. If you're wrong about her, Ruby has never lied to me. Not once, not about anything." Elliot's hands clenched around his coffee cup with enough force to make the ceramic creak. "And Elma Rodriguez has been watching people for 76 years. She taught drama for 3 decades. She knows the difference between acting and genuine fear. Elliot leaned forward, his voice dropping to an urgent whisper. I can't fail her the way I failed Sarah. Hey now. Ron's voice softened with genuine compassion. Sarah's accident wasn't your fault and you know it. You can't carry that guilt around for the rest of your life. But this is my fault. I brought Sylvia into our lives. I trusted her with my daughter. Elliot met his friend's eyes with an intensity that was almost painful to witness. I was so desperate to give Ruby a mother figure, so grateful to have someone who understood what we'd been through, that I ignored every instinct that told me something was wrong. Ron was quiet for a long moment, his engineer's mind working through the logistics and legal implications of what Elliot was proposing. He had helped design security systems for government buildings and corporate headquarters. But this was different. This was personal. This was about protecting a child who had already lost too much. I've got some new equipment, Ron said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. Ultra-sensitive recording devices that are virtually undetectable, state-of-the-art, stuff that I've been testing for a corporate client. We could place them strategically throughout the house. What about the legal issues? In your own home, recording to protect your child from suspected abuse. Any decent lawyer would argue. It's reasonable parental supervision. Ron pulled out his phone, making notes with the quick efficiency of someone accustomed to planning complex operations. But we need to be smart about this. Multiple devices, different locations. And we need a decoy. A decoy? Something obvious, that she might find and destroy while the real recording equipment stays hidden. Ron's eyes gleamed with the intensity of a man solving a crucial puzzle. The same look he got when he was working on a particularly challenging technical problem. How tech-savvy is she? Not very. She barely knows how to use the television remote without asking for help. Perfect. We'll put a fake device in something she'd expect to find surveillance equipment in. Maybe that teddy bear Ruby carries around. Something that would make sense for a paranoid father to use. Ron's fingers moved quickly over his phone screen, pulling up technical specifications and supplier information. When she finds and destroys it, she'll think she's won, that she's eliminated the threat. Elliot felt a spark of hope for the first time in days. The feeling of finally taking action instead of being a victim of circumstances beyond his control. And the real devices? Hidden in plain sight. Smoke detectors, wall clocks, picture frames, places she'd never think to look because they're part of the normal landscape of a home. Ron leaned forward, his voice intense with the focus that had made him one of the most sought-after surveillance specialists on the West Coast. But Elliot, once we start this, there's no going back. If we're wrong about her, if this is all some terrible misunderstanding, we're not wrong. Elliot's voice carried absolute certainty, the unwavering conviction of a father who knew his child better than anyone else in the world. Ruby doesn't lie, and Elma doesn't make mistakes about people. She taught teenagers for 30 years. She can spot manipulation and deception from a mile away. Ron nodded slowly, already mentally cataloging the equipment they would need and the best places to position it for maximum coverage. How soon do you need this done? Tomorrow, while Sylvia is at her therapy appointment and Ruby is at school. Elliot's voice was grim with determination. I can't let this continue for another day. Every moment she's alone with Ruby is another moment of potential trauma. Teaching Ruby to tell stories to her teddy bear became a delicate operation that broke Elliot's heart even as it filled him with pride in his daughter's resilience and trust. Elma had suggested the approach during a whispered conversation in the garden, explaining that children needed to feel safe and playful, not like they were unwitting participants in some adult conspiracy that they couldn't understand. The recording device that Ron had installed in Mr. Button's was a marvel of modern technology, smaller than a button, powered by a battery that could last for weeks, and capable of transmitting crystal-clear audio to a secure server that only Elliot and Ron could access. To Ruby, it would just be her beloved teddy bear, the same companion who had comforted her through her mother's death and countless nightmares. It is like this, Mija, Elma explained, sitting with Ruby in the garden as afternoon shadows grew long across the manicured lawn. The late autumn air was crisp but pleasant, filled with the scent of the last roses of the season and the distant sound of construction from one of Elliot's building projects downtown. Sometimes grown-ups cannot always be where we need them to be, no matter how much they want to protect us. But Mr. Buttons is always with you, right? Ruby nodded solemnly, clutching the bear that now contained a sophisticated recording device disguised as stuffing. Her small fingers traced the familiar worn patches on his fur, finding comfort in the texture that had soothed her through so many difficult moments. So when you talk to Mr. Buttons, you can tell him everything that happens in your day, like telling a story to your very best friend. Elma's voice was gentle but serious, conveying the importance of what she was asking without frightening the child. And later, if Daddy needs to know about your stories, Mr. Buttons can help him understand what happened when he was not there to see. Even the scary parts? Ruby's voice was small, but there was a spark of something stronger underneath. The beginning of hope that maybe finally, someone would truly hear what she had been trying to say. Elma's weathered hand reached out to gently stroke Ruby's curly hair, the gesture full of the love and protection that the child had been missing. Especially the scary parts, baby. The scary parts are the most important stories to tell, because that is how the grown-ups who love you can keep you safe. What Elma did not tell Ruby was that every word spoken near that teddy bear would be transmitted in real time to a secure server, where it would be automatically transcribed and stored with timestamp data that would be admissible in court. What she also did not mention was that the real recording devices were already in place throughout the house. In the kitchen clock that had been replaced with an identical model containing surveillance equipment, in the living room smoke detector that now housed a camera as well as audio recording capability, and in the innocent-looking picture frame in Ruby's bedroom that contained enough electronic sophistication to capture conversations from anywhere in the room. Will the stories help? Keep me safe? Ruby asked with the wisdom of a child who had learned too young that the world was not always kind, that adults could not always be trusted to tell the truth or keep their promises. Yes, mija. The stories will help keep you safe. Elma's voice carried absolute conviction, the certainty of someone who had spent her life protecting children and would not hesitate to do whatever was necessary to protect this one. That night, as Elliot tucked Ruby into bed according to their established ritual, she whispered against his ear with the conspiratorial tone of someone sharing a precious secret. Daddy, I'm going to tell Mr. Buttons everything, even the things that make me scared, even the things that hurt. That's perfect, sweetheart. Mr. Buttons is a very good listener, just like you deserve. Elliot's voice was steady, but inside, he was fighting back tears at his daughter's courage, her willingness to trust him and Elma enough to try this new approach to sharing her truth. Ruby smiled, the first genuine smile Elliot had seen from her in weeks, an expression that reminded him powerfully of Sarah and filled him with renewed determination to protect the light in his daughter's eyes. Just like you, Daddy. Mr. Buttons listens just like you do. As he kissed her goodnight and turned off the lights, leaving only the soft glow of her nightlight to chase away the darkness, Elliot silently prayed that they were doing the right thing, that the next time Sylvia showed her true face, they would finally have the proof they needed to protect Ruby forever, and that when this was all over, his daughter would still be able to trust the adults in her life to keep her safe. In the darkness, Ruby whispered to Mr. Buttons about her day, about the butterflies in the garden and the book Elma had read to her. Normal, innocent conversations of a child processing her world through the comfort of speaking to her dearest friend. But soon Elliot knew, those conversations would become something far more serious. Soon Mr. Buttons would hear the truth that adults had been hiding from each other, and finally justice would have a voice. 3 days later, disaster struck in the form of Sylvia's keen observation skills, proving that predators often possessed an acute awareness of potential threats to their carefully constructed deceptions. Elliot was in a crucial meeting with potential investors for a new sustainable housing project when his phone buzzed with an urgent text from Ron. She found the decoy. Everything is working exactly as planned. Through the hidden cameras that Ron had also installed throughout the house, Elliot would later watch footage that would haunt his dreams and fuel his determination to see justice served. The recording showed Sylvia playing with Ruby in the living room, their interaction appearing normal and affectionate to any casual observer. But Elliot, now trained to look for signs of manipulation, could see the subtle wrongness in every gesture. Sylvia had been examining Mr. Buttons with the intensity of someone who suspected she was being watched, her fingers probing the bear's fabric with surgical precision until she had found the small, hard object hidden inside. The discovery had been like watching a switch flip in her brain, transforming her from the gentle caregiver she pretended to be into something cold and calculating. The transformation that followed was terrifying in its completeness, like watching a skilled actor drop their character mid-performance. The gentle, caring woman vanished entirely, replaced by someone whose eyes burned with fury, and whose voice carried the kind of controlled menace that made seasoned law enforcement officers reach for their weapons. She had torn Mr. Buttons apart, with methodical cruelty, pulling out the recording device and examining it with the intensity of a predator who had discovered a trap. "You little spy," she had hissed at Ruby, who cowered on the couch with tears streaming down her face. The child's terror was absolute and heartbreaking. The reaction of someone who had been conditioned to expect violence and had learned that resistance only made things worse. "Did you think you could trick me? Did your daddy put you up to this little game?" Ruby's voice had been barely a whisper, trembling with fear. "I don't know what you mean. I don't understand." "Don't lie to me." Sylvia's voice had risen to a shout that echoed off the high ceilings, and Ruby had flinched so violently that she nearly fell off the couch. The child's reaction spoke of conditioning, of repeated trauma that had taught her to expect physical violence to follow verbal abuse. But then Sylvia had caught herself, her eyes darting to the windows where Elma might be working in the garden, where neighbors might overhear, where evidence of her true nature might be observed by witnesses. She had forced her features back into a mask of calm, though her eyes remained cold as winter stones, predatory and calculating. "We're going to have a little talk about telling stories, Ruby, about what happens to little girls who make up lies about grown-ups who care about them." Her voice had dropped to a whisper that was somehow more terrifying than her earlier shouting, carrying the kind of quiet menace that spoke of serious consequences for disobedience. The device in her hand had met the marble floor with a satisfying crunch as she ground it under her heel with vicious satisfaction, not knowing that every word, every threatening gesture, every moment of psychological manipulation was being captured by the real recording equipment hidden throughout the house. The irony was perfect. In her moment of triumph, Sylvia was actually providing the most damning evidence against herself. "There," she had said with false sweetness that fooled no one who could see her eyes. "No more listening devices. No more spying. Just you and me and the truth, Ruby. And the truth is that you're going to learn what happens to little girls who try to get grown-ups in trouble." But the truth was already being preserved, stored safely on servers that Sylvia would never find, documented with time-stamped data and digital authentication that would stand up in any court in the country. Justice was finally being served, one recorded word at a time. The recordings from that afternoon painted a picture so horrific that Elliot had to stop the playback twice to compose himself, stepping away from his computer to pace the length of his office while rage and heartbreak warred in his chest. Elma sat beside him in his office, her weathered hands clasped tightly in her lap, her face pale but determined as they listened to Sylvia's true voice for the first time, the voice she used when she thought no one was listening. When the mask came off and the predator underneath was free to emerge. "You manipulative little brat," Sylvia's voice crackled through the speakers with a venom that was shocking in its intensity. "Do you think crying will work with me the way it works with your father? Do you think I can't see exactly what you're doing, you little manipulator?" Ruby's voice was small and terrified, the sound of a child who had learned that resistance brought pain. "I just want my daddy to come home. Your daddy isn't here, and he's not coming back for hours." Sylvia's voice carried the kind of sadistic pleasure that spoke of someone who enjoyed having power over others, especially those too small and vulnerable to fight back. "And when he gets back, you're going to tell him that you made up those nasty stories about me. You're going to say you were confused and sorry and that you want me to stay. But I wasn't making it up." Ruby's voice broke on the words, the sound of truth being crushed under the weight of adult manipulation. The sound of a slap echoed through the recording, sharp and cruel, followed by Ruby's sharp cry of pain and shock. Elma's hands clenched into fists, her dark eyes blazing with protective fury, while Elliot felt his vision go red with a rage so intense it was almost blinding. "You'll learn not to cross me, little girl. I've been working with children for 15 years. I know exactly how to make them behave without leaving marks that anyone will notice." Sylvia's voice carried the confidence of someone who had perfected her methods through practice, who had hurt other children and gotten away with it. The recording continued for another 25 minutes, documenting verbal abuse, psychological manipulation, and threats that would haunt Elliot for the rest of his life. Sylvia had been methodical in her cruelty, alternating between physical intimidation and emotional manipulation with the skill of someone who understood exactly how to break a child's spirit without leaving evidence that casual observers would notice. She had called Ruby stupid, worthless, and unwanted. She had told the child that her mother had died because she was tired of dealing with such a disappointing daughter. She had threatened to hurt Ruby worse if she ever spoke to her father about their private conversations again. And through it all, Ruby had remained remarkably brave, refusing to promise things she didn't believe, holding on to her truth even when it brought pain. "If you ever try to get me in trouble again, I will make sure you have no father at all." Sylvia's voice had turned deadly serious during this threat. "There are ways to make people disappear, little girl. Ways to make accidents happen. Your mother learned that the hard way." The implication was clear and terrifying. Sylvia was claiming responsibility for Sarah's death, suggesting that Ruby's mother had been murdered for crossing her. Whether it was true or just psychological manipulation designed to terrorize a child, it was evidence of a mind capable of the most heinous crimes. "That monster," Elma whispered, tears streaming down her weathered cheeks as the recording finally ended. "That poor, brave baby." Elliot's voice was deadly calm when he finally spoke, the controlled fury of a man who had found his purpose and would not be deterred from it. "Ron was right about one thing. Once we started this, there was no going back." He looked at Elma, with eyes that burned with paternal fury and absolute determination. Sylvia just lost a game she didn't even know she was playing. But more than that, she had revealed herself completely, stripping away every pretense and showing the true face of evil that had been hiding behind a mask of professional compassion. The evidence was overwhelming, undeniable, and legally bulletproof. Justice was no longer a hope, it was an inevitability. Elliot spent the next day preparing for war with the methodical precision of a general planning a decisive battle. He contacted his lawyer, Maria Santos, who specialized in child protection cases and had a reputation for destroying predators who hurt children. He compiled the recordings into a comprehensive file with timestamps and digital authentication. He coordinated with Ron to ensure that every moment of the coming confrontation would be documented, and he arranged for Sylvia to be alone with Ruby one more time. But this time, he would be watching and waiting, ready to step in the moment his daughter needed protection. He made an elaborate show of leaving for a 3-day business trip to Portland, kissing Ruby goodbye with extra tenderness and reminding Sylvia of his expected return time while fighting every instinct that screamed at him not to leave his daughter alone with a predator. But instead of driving to the airport, he parked 2 blocks away and walked back through the garden entrance that Elma had left unlocked, moving through his own home like a ghost seeking justice. "She started the moment your car left the driveway," Elma whispered, her face tight with anger as she met him at the back door. "The mask came off before you even reached the end of the street." They could hear Sylvia's voice through the walls, no longer bothering to maintain even the pretense of her gentle facade. "Stop sniveling, Ruby. Daddy isn't here to protect you now, and he's not coming back for 3 whole days. That's plenty of time for us to come to an understanding about how things are going to work in this house." Elliot moved through his own home with predatory stealth, guided by the real-time audio from the hidden devices and driven by a father's fury that had crystallized into cold, calculating purpose. He positioned himself just outside the living room door, recording everything on his phone while the hidden devices captured backup evidence from multiple angles. "You think you're so special?" Sylvia was saying, her voice dripping with the kind of venom that spoke of deep-seated psychological damage. Poor little orphan girl who lost her mommy. Well, let me tell you something about your precious mother. Don't talk about my mommy. Ruby's voice was stronger than Elliot had heard it in months, filled with the fierce protectiveness that children feel for their lost parents. I'll talk about whatever I want. Your precious daddy is gone, and when he comes back in 3 days, you're going to tell him that you've been a perfect little angel, that you were confused about those silly stories you told him. Sylvia's voice rose with each word, losing the careful control that had marked her earlier manipulations. I won't lie about what you did to me. The sound of furniture moving echoed through the house, followed by Ruby's frightened gasp. Let go of me, you're hurting my arm. I'm going to hurt a lot more than your arm if you don't start showing me the respect I deserve, Sylvia snarled, and Elliot could hear the distinctive sound of a child being roughly handled by someone much larger and stronger. That was enough. Elliot stepped into the room like an avenging angel, his phone held high, recording every second while his eyes blazed with righteous fury. You just lost a wordless game, Sylvia. The woman froze like a deer caught in headlights, her hand still gripping Ruby's arm hard enough to leave bruises. Her face twisted with the kind of rage that she had never allowed him to see before. For a moment, her true self was completely visible, cold, cruel, and utterly without remorse or human compassion. She looked like what she was, a predator who had been caught in the act of destroying innocence. Then, like a computer rebooting, she tried to summon her sweet mask one more time, her features shifting as she attempted to return to the gentle persona that had fooled him for so long. Elliot, you're back early. Ruby and I were just... I heard exactly what you were doing. Elliot's voice cut through her lies like a blade through silk, sharp and unforgiving. Every word, every threat, every moment of abuse, all of it recorded, all of it admissible in court, all of it more than enough to send you to prison for a very long time. Ruby ran to her father with the desperate speed of someone escaping a nightmare, burying her face against his chest while he wrapped protective arms around her small, trembling body. He could feel her heartbeat, rapid and frightened, and he silently swore that no one would ever be allowed to terrorize his daughter again. The game is over, Sylvia. Pack your things and get out of my house. The police will be here within the hour, and my lawyer is already preparing charges for child abuse, assault, and terroristic threats. Sylvia's mask finally shattered completely, revealing the monster underneath in all its twisted glory. You have no idea what you're dealing with, she spat, her voice carrying the kind of menace that made seasoned detectives reach for their weapons. That little brat has been nothing but trouble from the day I met her. She needed to learn respect. What she needed was protection from people like you. Elliot's voice was deadly calm, the controlled fury of a man who had found his purpose and would not be swayed from it. And that's exactly what she's going to get. The legal proceedings that followed were swift and decisive, a testament to the power of irrefutable evidence and the determination of a father who would not rest until justice was served. Sylvia Chen's carefully constructed life crumbled like a house of cards in a hurricane. As investigators dug deeper into her background and discovered a pattern of abuse that stretched back over 15 years, the recordings provided irrefutable evidence of child abuse, threats, and psychological manipulation that even the most skilled defense attorney could not explain away. But more damning still were the other victims who came forward once Sylvia's arrest made the news. Former students, children she had counseled, young people whose lives had been damaged by her calculated cruelty, but who had never been believed. When they tried to speak their truth, Detective Sarah Morrison, who specialized in crimes against children, told Elliot that the case was one of the most clear-cut examples of predatory behavior she had seen in 20 years of law enforcement. Your recordings didn't just save Ruby, she said during one of their meetings. They gave voice to dozens of other children who thought no one would ever believe them. Sylvia Chen was sentenced to 15 years in prison for multiple counts of child abuse, assault, and terroristic threats. Her counseling license was permanently revoked, and a civil suit resulted in a substantial settlement that Elliot immediately donated to organizations dedicated to protecting children from predators who hid behind professional facades. But more importantly than the legal victory was Ruby's healing journey. With the help of Dr. Elena Vasquez, a genuinely caring therapist who specialized in childhood trauma and had been thoroughly vetted by both Elliot and Elma, Ruby began to process what had happened to her and learn that she was not responsible for the actions of the adults who had hurt her. The nightmares that had plagued her sleep gradually faded. The constant vigilance that had marked her daily existence slowly relaxed as she learned to trust that her home was truly safe again. Her laughter returned like sunshine after a long, dark winter, filling the house with the sound that Elliot had feared he might never hear again. Ron and Elma officially became Ruby's emotional guardians, chosen family who would always be there, to listen, to watch, and to protect. The house that had once felt like a prison of secrets became a sanctuary filled with warmth, laughter, and the sound of 3 generations coming together to create something beautiful from the ashes of trauma. "Daddy," Ruby said one evening as they sat in the garden watching Elma teach her to plant spring bulbs that would bloom when the dark winter finally ended. "I'm glad I told you the truth. Even when it was scary, even when she tried to make me think no one would believe me. I'm glad too, sweetheart. And I'm proud of how brave you were." Elliot's voice carried the weight of absolute love and unwavering commitment to his daughter's well-being. Ruby looked thoughtful, her small hands gentle, with the delicate bulbs that would sleep through the winter and emerge transformed in the spring. "Elma says that telling the truth is like planting flowers. Sometimes it hurts at first when you have to dig in the dirt and it's cold and dark. But then, something beautiful grows that makes the whole world more beautiful." Elliot smiled, watching, his daughter's face glow with the confidence of a child who knew she was loved, protected, and believed. The shadows that had haunted her eyes for months were finally gone, replaced by the natural curiosity and joy that should mark every childhood. "Elma is very wise, and you are very brave. Will you always believe me when I tell you things? Even if they're hard to hear, even if other people try to make you think I'm making things up? Always, Ruby. Always. Your voice matters more than anything else in this world, and I will never stop listening." The promise hung in the evening air like a sacred vow, witnessed by the stars and sealed with the kind of love that could overcome any darkness the world might try to bring into their lives. Healing doesn't happen overnight, but it does happen when children know they have adults who will listen, believe, and act to protect them. Sometimes the greatest gift we can give a child is the certainty that their voice will always be heard. 6 months later, the Ford estate bloomed with new life, transformed from a place of hidden secrets into a sanctuary of healing and hope. The gardens that Elma tended with such loving care had become a place of joy and safety, where Ruby played, without fear, and laughter echoed off the walls that had once witnessed so much pain. The house itself seemed lighter somehow, as if the removal of Sylvia's toxic presence had allowed the very architecture to breathe freely again. Spring had arrived with unusual warmth, painting the landscape in shades of green and gold that spoke of renewal and second chances. The cherry trees that Sarah had planted years ago were in full bloom, their delicate pink petals drifting on the breeze like confetti celebrating Ruby's return to innocence. In the months since Sylvia's arrest, the child had undergone a transformation that was nothing short of miraculous, not just healing from trauma, but growing into a stronger, more confident version of herself. On a crisp Saturday morning in late April, Ruby approached Elma with something precious in her hands. Mr. Buttons, carefully repaired and restored to his former glory by Mrs. Chen, a seamstress who specialized in beloved childhood toys and who had donated her services when she heard Ruby's story. The teddy bear looked exactly as he had before Sylvia's violent destruction, his brown fur soft and clean, his button eyes bright with restored dignity. "I want you to have him," Ruby said, pressing the teddy bear into Elma's weathered hands with the solemnity of someone bestowing a great honor, "so that everything I say will always be heard by someone who loves me." Elma's eyes filled with tears as she accepted the gift, understanding the profound significance of what Ruby was offering. This was not just a toy being passed from child to adult. This was a symbol of trust restored, of a child's faith in the power of being heard and believed. Are you sure, Mija? He has been your friend for so long through so many difficult times. He taught me that my words matter, that grown-ups will listen when children tell the truth, even when the truth is scary. Ruby's voice carried a wisdom that should have been years beyond her age, the hard-won understanding of someone who had faced darkness and emerged into light. But I don't need him to feel safe anymore. I have you and Daddy and Ron. I have people who believe me no matter what. Ruby's small hand reached out to stroke Mr. Button's fur one last time, a gesture of farewell that was also a celebration of how far she had come. He can keep you company when you're working in the garden. And maybe someday, if another little girl needs someone to listen to her stories, Mr. Buttons can help her too. The generosity of spirit in that suggestion took Elma's breath away. Even after everything she had endured, Ruby was thinking about how her experience might help other children who found themselves in similar situations. It was a testament to the resilience of the human spirit and the power of love to transform even the deepest wounds into sources of strength. Elliot watched from the kitchen window, his heart full of gratitude for the unlikely family they had, created from the ashes of betrayal and pain. The morning light streaming through the glass caught the silver in his hair, evidence of the stress he had endured during those dark months. But his face was peaceful in a way it hadn't been since Sarah's death. He had kept his promise to protect his daughter, and in doing so, he had discovered depths of strength and determination he hadn't known he possessed. He thought of Sarah often in moments like this, wondering what she would think of the man he had become and the father he was still learning to be. He knew she would be proud of Ruby's courage and Elma's wisdom, and his own refusal to let evil triumph in their home. The grief of losing her would always be part of him, but it no longer defined him. Instead, it had taught him the preciousness of every moment with the people he loved. And the first one to hear will always be Dad, he whispered to himself, making a promise to the wind that carried his words toward heaven and to the little girl who was learning to trust the world again. In the garden, Ruby hugged Elma tight, breathing in the familiar scent of earth and flowers that had become synonymous with safety and unconditional love. Then she ran toward the house where her father waited with arms open wide, her laughter bright and free as it rang across the estate. Behind them, the marigolds they had planted together swayed in the morning breeze, bright, beautiful, and growing strong in the light. The truth had set them all free from the prison of secrets and lies that had nearly destroyed their family. In a world that too often silenced the innocent, 3 generations had learned to listen, to believe, and to act with the fierce protectiveness that love demands. Evil had tried to hide behind a smile and professional credentials, but it had crumbled the moment someone dared to trust a child's voice in her own home. In that trust, healing had begun. In that belief, justice had been served, and in that love, a family had been reborn stronger than ever before, ready to face whatever challenges the future might bring with the confidence that comes from knowing that truth, no matter how difficult, will always be heard and honored in their home. If this story touched your heart, please share it with someone who needs to hear it. Like and subscribe to hear more stories about protecting the innocent and celebrating the courage it takes to speak truth to power. Sometimes the smallest voices carry the most important messages, and they deserve to be heard. Every child deserves an adult who will listen, believe, and act to protect them. Be that adult. The world is waiting for your courage to make the difference that could save a life.